Jesus and the widow's son, from Luke chapter 7, verses 11 to 17. The town was rising up slowly in the distance. Walking along the road, leading a large crowd, was Jesus. He was setting a steady pace as he made his way towards the town. The crowd, who included his disciples, had just seen Jesus show his power and his care by healing a servant girl with just a word. As they approached this new town, a town called Nain, they wondered whether Jesus would have another opportunity to show how powerful and caring he was. They wouldn't have to wait long. While Jesus' crowd was still some way off, there was an even bigger crowd coming slowly out of the city gates. As this crowd walked, you could hear the cries and screams of people in mourning. Leading this procession was a widow bent over with sorrow. She had tears streaming from her eyes, and she looked like someone who had lost all hope. Directly behind her were 4 men who marched slowly in unison. On their shoulders they carried a coffin, the coffin of this widow's only son. Her whole life seemed ruined and without hope. Slowly and steadily, the procession moved forward along the road that led out of the town. The cries of anguish continued to echo loudly in the air. It wasn't long before the crowd with Jesus saw the funeral procession. Quickly, the crowd coming towards the city moved off to the side of the road. They all had their heads bowed with respect as they saw the widow leading this procession for her dead son. Everyone stood off to the side except for one person. Jesus stayed standing on the road, directly in front of the widow. When he had seen this lady, his heart went out to her, and he felt such care and compassion towards her. He reached out his hand and said in a soft and gentle voice, "Don't cry." Don't cry? To say "don't cry" to a woman who had just lost her only son? How cruel these words could have sounded. But when Jesus spoke these words, he wasn't being cruel. Jesus could say them because Jesus is the one who has all power, and he cares for people. The men carrying the coffin stood still with shocked looks on their faces. What were they to do? They watched, growing more and more nervous, as Jesus walked up past the widow towards the coffin. Slowly he raised his hand and he touched it. The mourners and the widow gasped in horror. For a stranger to touch a dead man's coffin, it was just wrong. Then Jesus spoke in a firm and steady voice. The words echoed around like thunder. "Get up!" he commanded. Get up? To say "get up" to a dead person in front of their family and their friends, well, that's just cruel. And it's also stupid. Dead people can't get up, they're dead. But when Jesus said these words, they weren't stupid and they weren't cruel, because Jesus is the one who has all power, and Jesus is the one who cares. The men carrying the coffin were horrified. How could this man say such a thing? They were thinking about putting the coffin down to push the man away when they felt the coffin move. And as they slowly lifted their eyes, the widow's son sat up and began talking to them. Gasps and screams and cheers rose from the crowd as they realized that this young man was no longer dead. He was alive! Jesus had shown his power by raising a dead person back to life. The crowds looked on as the coffin bearers quickly put the coffin down. They stood there in astonishment as Jesus reached out and gently took the boy by the hand. Slowly, Jesus helped the boy step over the coffin edge and onto solid ground. He then led the boy towards his mother. She put out her arms carefully, unsure whether all this was happening or whether it was just a wonderful, wonderful dream. As she touched her son with her own 2 hands, a sudden wave of happiness came over her. This man, Jesus, had cared for her so much that he had given back her son, her only son. Soon the sound of partying filled the air. People were shouting and clapping and jumping up and down. Cheers and praises filled the sky. As people considered what they had just seen, they were overwhelmed with joy. They had seen Jesus show in the most amazing and spectacular way that he cares for people who are hurting. But even more than that, they had seen that Jesus had power like no one else. He could even bring the dead back to life. And so they praised him loudly.